Quick note before I begin the translation. I do need to give a warning about the content of this eclogue as well, just as I did the last one. Some of the insults that our cast of characters will be throwing at each other may not be appropriate for the ears of the young. I advise that you review the content with me before introducing to your children if you're concerned about that, as with the previous eclogue. I can't say that I know how many eclogues this is true for. I hope not many more. Salve, Mike, and welcome. Today we're going to be taking a look at Vergil's third eclogue, and sorry for taking so long to get around to this. As you can probably tell by looking at the table, I've moved a few times in the last month and a half or so haven't had the time to do the usual work necessary to even prepare this. But enough of that, let's go ahead and get started. Here is our rubric, everything we look for as we go through the text. And let us read. Manalkas. Dic mihi, da moita, coium pecus an meleboi? Da moitas, non, verum aegonos, nuper mihi tradirit aegon. In felexos imper, oes, pecus, ipse neairam dum foet, ac ne me sibi praeferat, illa veretur. Hic alienus ovis costos bis mulget in hor, at succus pecori et lac subducitur agnis. And there we have as far as we're going to go. First, we should introduce our characters. We've got Manalkas and Demoitas, neither of whom we've seen before. I tried to figure out what as usual, I tried to figure out the names of everybody, so that's going to include Aegon and Neaira, to middling success and certainty. Manalkas has a couple different options of origin from the Greek. Pure guesswork on my part. It could be that he's from the verb meno, which means to remain, and then plus the word, one of three words that are all spelled very similarly, the only difference being the accent. That would be al-ka, al-k, or a different. Okay, so al-ka would have the al-kas would have the circumflex over the alpha. The first al-k has an acute, and then the second al-k has a acute over the alpha. And the difference between them is, as I said, we have stay, remain, so you get the meaning in names of steadfast. And then al-kas is a deed of prowess. And al-kei is strength. And then al-kei is an elk. So his name could mean steadfast deed of prowess. So he's the idea that he's a heroic fellow, or the name is something you would apply to a heroic fellow, but probably not this guy, since he's a shepherd of some sort. The other one is steadfast strength, so he's reliable, or steadfast elk are my three options. And then Demoitas was fortunately much easier. There is a direct Greek word that Vergil pulled from, and that would be a name. De motes. And fairly often, from what I can tell, just a normal omicron in Greek will transfer as an omicron epsilon, especially if at one point the Greek word had, or even could still have, an iota. So the diphthong omicron iota will turn into that in Latin. This word has the meaning of fellow citizen, commoner, or plebeian, which is, based on the insults that are going to happen later, a good fit. Now we can get into what they're actually saying. Manalkas starts off with one of our irregular imperatives. This comes from dico. Instead of saying dike, when you want somebody to speak, the E drops out. This is similar to words like carry, fare, lead, duke, and I think there are two more, but those are the ones that I can remember. So this is a second person singular present active imperative. And since there's a verb of speaking, you're going to say a direct object to an indirect object, which is what we have here with mihi. And what the object of the verb is going to be over here. Koium pecus. Koium is a archaic, should even say a rustic, since this is a rustic setting. Vergil's using it this way. Rustic version of cuius. So that would be genitive, singular, and then common. Pecus as our direct object. This is from pecus pecudus or pecus pecoris. If we take a look down here, we've got pecori, so it's probably pecus pecoris as the word, which is neuter. Nominative and accusative in the singular and the nominative accusative in the plural, all matching, so this one functions as our direct object, appropriately so. And it means flock or herd. In this case, it appears to be, as we can see later, flock of lambs. And then to finish off his question, the on here is not properly translated into English. We don't have a direct equivalent. Instead, it's, I'm going to translate it as EH, so maybe could be another option. But Melaboye, this is the character that we saw before, the cowherd. And we've got him with an I, so genitive, singular, masculine. And then one final thing, we have demoita with that A is going to be a vocative, singular, masculine. If we take a look at the Greek word, it's got demotes. Eta sigma as a nominative form in the Greek, as I think I've told you before, is the first conjugation. No, that's a verbs. First declension noun, masculine form, and the vocative is just a simple alpha, or I don't think it becomes an eta, but then the rest of the forms except for, so it's nominative, genitive, and just nominative and genitive that are different from the feminine form. So we got ace, u, which is borrowed from the second declension, and then a, ain, ah for the vocative. It is kind of one of the only ones that has a different vocative than the nominative in classical languages. Second declension, and then these Greek first declension masculines. Then we get into Demoitus's response. So non used as no, negative, and he then tells Menalcas, "Verum aigonos." Here we've got another Greek word. I'll give you the meaning in a moment. But what's important is our os here is actually an omicron sigma from the Greek, and that's a genitive singular Greek form. Masculine. Probably mark each of these as Greek form words, but we're working with Vergil and poetry. It should be pretty obvious. Meliboeus being a Latin ending. So aigonos, the nominative form we see over here, nominative, singular, masculine, in Greek is spelled alpha, epsilon, gamma, omega nu, and then our genitive is omicron, nu, omicron, sigma. Yeah, that's right. And it is another one of those direct words like demoita. And it can mean either beach, but a specific type of beach that I wasn't able to suss from the dictionary, or it just means the Aegean Sea. Okay, spelled the same way. Missing something here. Did I misspell it? Sorry, not an epsilon. An iota. Unaspirated. There we go. There's a second option, which might fit better since we're in a pastoral location with our characters, and that is the word ikes. Genitive still being the same, so ikes, aigonos, because sometimes the xi here will turn into a gamma. It's funky how Greek works. But we've got beach, the Aegean Sea, or goat. But specifically the ibex type of goat. So I'll write those down here. But now moving back to actually translating this, truly of Aegeans, flock, nuper being an adverb, recently, mihi, dative with the verb tradidit, Got it there for the third person singular. This comes from traho, trahare, tradidi. So the reduplication pulled from do, dare, dedi. It gives us a perfect tense, active, and indicative. And mistook that C there for a comma for a moment. This one means to hand over, to entrust. It can also mean to betray, which is, as we'll see down here in Menalcas' response, how he takes it. And then Igon as our subject. So I'm going to write all this translation down, and then we'll get to Menalcas' response. And then Menalcas says, "Oh, ever unhappy." Whatever unhappy? Sheep and flock. So os comes from owis. So we get, with the es, we have a, in this case, vocative plural. Why vocative plural? Because we've got the omicron right there. Speaking of which, I should erase that one. That one doesn't appear, so I stuck it in because it's typical, but since we have one actually appearing in the spoken word where it doesn't appear, it's important not to insert one in English. My mistake there. But in Felix, because of this vocative indicating O, must also be vocative, singular. And Felix, Felicis, Felicae, I think, for the neuter. I don't remember if this is just a single termination adjective. I'm going to assume not. Os is feminine, and then pecus we have as a neuter. I think it's picking up the feminine from the sheep and not from the pecus, because otherwise it would have to be in Felicae, if I'm correct about the neuter forms. If not, and I remember there will be a note at the bottom, but time being what it is. So vocative singular, feminine, question mark. Semper, adverb. Always, vocative plural, feminine, and then pecus, also vocative, but singular and neuter. So he's speaking now to the herds because of the great misfortune of Igon's action, but who is the misfortune really for? We'll get to that in a moment. Moving on, we have ipse from ipse, ipsa, ipsum, nominative singular masculine form, probably referring back to Igon, since that is whom Demoitus was just speaking of, and it can't go with pecus or os being the wrong number. And then neairam, we have an am right there for an accusative singular feminine, so that can't be our subject. Looking ahead, we have dum foet, et right there, foet o. This is a second conjugation, so the e is not indicating future. Instead, it is just a third person singular present stem, active and indicative. And this means to fondle, according to the green and yellow commentary. It mean to cherish, it can mean to warm, like hold on to, pat, rub, something along those lines. Would be taking neaira as its object with Igon as the subject. Doom can mean while, since, until. Until almost never makes sense, so while, that's what we're going to go with, and then ak being a hard break in this clause to introduce a new clause we'll get to in a moment. But first, what does neaira mean? Well, the Greek form of it I was able to find. However, the lexicon was less than helpful in defining neaira for me. Instead, I had to look either side of the word to figure out, is there something close in form to this that could give us the meaning? Kind of like how I did with Menalcas and other names before now. And a near adjective to neaira only has one letter difference, and that would be neara. So no iota. And it's nearos, neara, nearon. I think that's what it was. And it means youthful. So what an iota would do to change the meaning of that, I'm not sure. Maybe it's just an added inflection, like sometimes happens in names. Being an extremely nearos Hebrew reader and not knowing much about how names are formed in there, what a lot of those look like to me is you have what the Hebrews would do is you would take an adjective and then you change the intonation slightly. And so that would usually be, I think, changing it in a verb form, so it's like a participle or something like that, or it's indicative is about the best I can say. An indicative form, and it's not the right word for Hebrew, but so it's a specific form of the verb, like Judah means he is to be praised. And so in Greek or Latin, we would say that's indicative in form, but in this case, I don't remember. I think is perfective form, what in Hebrew they would call the perfect tense. Could be wrong there. Yeah, we're doing with Latin, you don't care about that. But a change in the vowel structure of the Hebrew words changes the word just enough so that it's not a normal form of verb or noun, and instead is applied as a name. I hope that made some sense in English, but let's move on. I'm going to assume I'm possibly right about youthful, just as I'm possibly right about one of those. But what is he saying? Aigon himself, while he fondles, while he cherishes ne'aira, a Moorish interest, akne mi sibi preferat, me as accusative singular object, and because we have sibi as the dative singular, referring back self-reflexively to ipse, preferat as our verb. This comes from no. Am I getting? No. That's right. Prefero, prefere. So it's a third conjugation, which would not normally have an a. A can't be futured because that's s et e form. So instead we have the a introducing a subjunctive, which goes with ne, a negative clause, a lest, who, illa, their nominative, singular, feminine inside this clause. Prefer, it means what it looks like in English. Thus, she, Na'ara, prefer me to Aigon. And then we'll get what's going on further with that momentarily. But I should parse that. Joining back in with what's going on, we have veretur. With that UR right there, we know we have a passive form. This comes from veror. It's a deponent, so it's a passive informed deponent verb though, so it has an active meaning. Veror means to revere. So what we've got going on here with our third singular present? Yes. Veror, vereor. There we go. It has to be a second. Vereor, just like, what was it? Prefero is no. Brain crashed. Ignore what I said about prefero. Vereor is the second. Prefero is not. But foet, vereo, and foel. There we go. That's what I was looking for. Those are both second conjugations. So, deponent and indicative. Aigon, it appears that Menalcas thinks, is doing everything in his power to keep Neaira away from Menalcas, as we've seen in the past few. There are only two that we've done so far. In the past Ecloga, there's rivalry going on between all these people, at least in their minds. For Corydon, the rivalry was purely in his mind, and for all we know, Menalcas could be telling the truth that Neaira is attracted to him, but Aigon is trying to snatch her away, or maybe it's the other way around. We don't know. Which actually reminds me about something I forgot to mention. The way that they're talking about Meliboeus and Aigon, according to the green and yellow, indicates that Meliboeus is of a higher social order somehow than all three of these guys. But moving on. So Aigon is revering, showing reverence to, devotion to Neaira, and that's keeping her from liking Menalcas, which is a bad thing in his mind. But we move on. I'm going to add that translation later. Hic, this one appears to mean the word here. Because we don't really need, well, not that we need it, so we've got the C What is wrong with my brain today? C indicates to us that it's the adverb showing us location, which alienus us for the nominative singular. Os could be modified by alienus if it is talking about a male sheep like a ram, but immediately after os we have custos, os right there, and custos is custos custodes. And it is a masculine or feminine word, which means it can only be nominative, which means always can't be nominative. And then here we have another one of Vergil's is accusative plurals. Feminine. Yes, feminine. Alienus modifying custos for nominative, singular, masculine. Bis is an adverb meaning twice. Pretty cool when we see these. We got, forget the one for one. Bis, ter, kotor, I think it's 4 times. But molget here is our verb that kostos is doing. Et, this is from molgo, molger, no, can't be from that. It's got to be molgeo, because this is also indicative and it is present. Yeah, so another second conjugation, which I could be wrong about, sorry if that is the case. But molgeo, I think, is what we've got going on. Third, singular, present, active, and indicative, and it means to milk. And then en hora, we have a prepositional phrase plus the ablative of time when, singular and feminine. And bis here is the important note. You don't milk a goat twice. You don't milk a sheep twice in an hour. That makes no sense. At most, you can milk a healthy animal like a goat or a sheep 3 times a day, but that would have to be a high-producing animal. When my family raised goats, the max that we would have to milk almost every single one we ever had was twice a day. Some of them you could really only milk once a day because they didn't produce very much. We boarded a goat once named Gretchen. This enormous creature had to weigh more than my brother and I combined, and Gretchen produced almost as much milk as a small cow would. And she was also a sweet goat. But that's completely unreasonable. So when we get to Menalcas's soon insult of demoitas, it'll make some sense. But an alienus, an alien, an other guardian, twice milks in an hour the sheep. At sucus, us right there for nominative, singular, masculine. Pecori, we have our stem change with an I, pecos, pecoris. Dative, singular, neuter. So this is going to be reference. At lac, another nominative, singular, or it could be accusative, singular. Neuter, meaning milk. Subducatur, tur, ur for our third singular. This is subduco, subducere. It's an active verb, so then this must be passive, but in the present stem. And indicative. And then agnis, is right there. This comes from agnus, am I doing that right? Yeah. Agnus, agni, which means we have an ablative plural, or we could have a dative plural, as we have a dative here. Conjunctions connect 2 things of the same sort. We've got sucrus and lac being connected with subducatur as their verb, but since there's a dative paired with our first subject, there should also be a dative paired with our second subject, and maybe not dative, as if you remember, now that I remember, dative and ablative of the third declension in some adjectives or nouns looks the same, so should write down both of these here. Not singular, plural, and masculine. Subduco, to lead away, so it could be ablative of separation, which makes a lot more sense than the dative of reference that I was originally thinking as I was writing all this down. So our alien custodian leads away, or because of our alien custodian milking the sheep twice here, the sucus, the juice, the strength, the rigor, and the milk is removed from the flock and from the lambs. And the way that Menalcas is talking, sucus must be what's called colostrum milk, which has a higher quantity of a certain type of proteins. I forget what they're called, but that very young lambs, very young kids need to develop properly, and it's the mother will produce this different type of milk early on after the birth of the baby. So what he's saying is that the Agnis are very young. Demoitas doesn't know what he's doing. He's milking the goats not only too much, but he's milking them earlier than is proper. Now, you have to milk the goat, or you have to milk the sheep, if it is a milking animal in this case, because some sheep aren't, when they're producing the colostrum milk, because they usually produce more at first than the baby is able to handle. Now, back in the day, I'm not sure how they handled that. I don't know how big herds handle it now, but in small herds, you do have to do that. And then at least what we would do is we would freeze it and store it in the event something went wrong. If the mother died before the babies had grown up enough, and then we would have that in reserve to feed them so that they would still get the nutrients that they need. And also, it's something that you could keep feeding them when the mother switches to producing more regular milk. It's not that it's safer for humans to milk, but it tastes better. Colostrum milk tastes weird, even though it's got other things that your body can also use. But there we have it. I'm going to write all this down and join you again shortly. So there we have our translation. Let's go ahead and take a look at it in its own context. Tell me, Demoicha, whose herd is this? Meliboeus', eh? No, truly Igon's. Recently, to me, Igon entrusted them. Oh, unhappy always, sheep and herd, while he himself fondles Neaira, and lest me, to him that girl prefers, he reveres. Here another guard milks the sheep twice in the hour, and juice from herd and milk from lambs is wrested. Basically, Demoichus is part of Igon's evil plan to keep Menalcas from his girl. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope taking a look at this has been helpful for you, and I hope that you have a very good day. Wale.